Nice to see all of you, especially on a Friday evening. As they say on Lufthansa, we know you had many choices. So we're thrilled that you selected Lufthansa. I actually wrote a piece for this, but I decided it's probably better to make it up as we go. You going to listen, or are you going to hang around the back? Sit next to Christmas. Sit down, will you? Come on. It's not that, you're not that dangerous. Yeah. You know, there's a phrase, a literary phrase, and this is probably not for attribution because I don't know who said it, but it's a reference to what it takes, and I think in one way or another this involves all of us, or most of us. It's coughing up the moon, which is a poignant metaphor, coughing up the moon. And it's supposed to be indicative of what it takes for an architect or for an artist to make something unusual or new, coughing up the moon. So this is very poignant, but I think where Peter enters this discussion, and let me say this as a structural conception in history and in the world for lots of things, not only art and architecture, once you cough it up, what happens to it? So does it rise or does it descend? Does it appear? Does it disappear? Is it a foggy night? You know, all of that. And in a structural sense, and it's not, I think, out of malice, but just intrinsically, what exists resists what's coming, resists it. So what's in place, or what's entrenched, or what's old in a certain way, what's old resists what's new, almost automatically. So while you're coughing up the moon, and there's resistance to that. There's no constituency, in fact. There's no constituency for the next moon. But somehow there is already a constituency for the existing moon. So if I don't get it exactly right, but you know what I'm talking about. There are interesting architects around 20, 30, interesting artists around 20, 30, whatever you think. I think there's really only one guy around that I know walking the earth at the moment, uniquely, who has made a space and made a place for new work, which is to say, made room and established a constituency for the new moon and the new work. And in that sense, Peter Noever has his hand or his face or his finger or his presence or his voice in the work of very unusual people who produced very special work, and no one was listening, or very few people were listening. So he made an audience, he made a constituency, he made a space for people who were genuinely original, coughing up moons in a way to no avail, and made a space and a place and a presence for that. And subsequently, those people, in many, many cases, went on to do all sorts of adventurous, mischievous, astonishing work. So, please welcome the author of many coffers up of many moons, Mr. Peter Noever.
Yeah, so it's hard to disagree. Yes, I'm since a year. I haven't been here in Los Angeles, and I'm happy to be together with you. I could say thank you for coming. Okay, it's good that you are here. I just want to give you, and Eric, he just tried it in his literature way. To mention what really interests me and always did interest me, and this is, I think I'm very curious about things what are going on, and special about space. And I think the space, and not only the space, also the site, is something, if you work in the art field with the artists and with architects and designers, the space is something which is not given, which you have to fight all the time, and it is not only the visual space, from my understanding, but I also believe very strong that a site this is the really challenge. The challenge for art, as far as art I understand. And I believe very strong that today art institution going maybe in a completely wrong way. I mean, if you look at art institution all over the world, they more or less have a very similar program. They have the same artists, which are collecting the same artists, showing the same artists, and there's maybe 10 to 20% which are local artists, so they're different. But the world does not exist with 500 artists or thousands. I think there's many more. And one of the things which always interested me, where is the art coming from? Or where is art today? It's not only the heroes we know, and I have a big respect also from people which I don't want to go not in names now, but I think you have to do, if you really try to do something, you have to try to find a balance between really searching people, and searching people is you have to attract. You have to attract artists and to invite. And sometimes individuals are not so sure if they or they don't want even to say that they're artists. And I think this is another challenge. But what I have prepared a little bit for here is and I don't believe so much in experience, because experience always this also Eric mentioned, this can be very tricky in the sense that you already know things, and then you lose your curiosity, or you lose an open view. So I just try to. Is there a chance? Okay. Do you know whether? No? Oh, okay. So when I mentioned the side of art, so the side of art is also of course the artist side. The artist side, there where the artist is fulfilling his dreams or his ideas, and artist sites, I would say, are not exhibitions or their media coverage and reception. This is not what counts. The real manifestation of art occur in permanent and irremovable sites of art created by the artist. And I think this is the opposite what an art institution is running, because they take the artwork, present the artwork, and then it deliver it back to the artist or to somewhere. And I think this is, maybe it's an interesting move for education, has nothing to do with art, for my understanding. Let us briefly state, if you are interested in a new side of art, there is an obligation to the present. We have to find a new strategy, a manifestation of the here and now in art is capable of creating context and external influence and social consciousness. A new institution to set means to set standards of commensurate newness and up-to-date art institution that makes some stable investments in the future. In the future, for here shall arise the cultural heritage for tomorrow. A new contemporary art territory, if I may call it, like propose, is not to position art as a passive object of the viewer's gaze, but rather to actively produce it and put it into action on site. I think this is the most important, that an art institution becomes something that it provokes or provocate a new work of art. Otherwise, it doesn't make so much sense. And I'm here involved in a workshop, and we visit today Paul McCarthy. And he's one of the very exceptional artists in the world and in Los Angeles. So, like, kind of these artists, doesn't make any sense to go in a conventional museum. It's not only the scale, because the scale does not fit in any museum, what he's going on and producing. I think it's also the idea, because he does not deliver a finished artwork. He's now trying find a dialogue between sculpture and movie, between the tradition of the movie industry in Hollywood, but of course in a completely different way, in the way of a fine artist. And I think this is just because then it's easier to understand. But there are so many artists today, which is absolutely senseless to go in conventional art institution. I mean, they do it because sometimes they do it because they will be asked, and it's probably necessary for the art market, and sometimes it's necessary to survive. But I think there are many things which don't work, which are missing. But rather actively produce it and put it into action on site. Both the production and the presentation of the artworks will be publicly accessible, making a contemporary art territory into a catalyst of immediate dialogue between artists, architects, designers, and the art public. I think also, for me, it's very interesting, the contemporary. And contemporary, I mean, we have one of the specialties of a museum is to make boxes, to make definition in categories. And I believe very strong that what is moving in contemporary is the contemporary. Contemporary means that is what we smell, what we are, what we feel. This is the contemporary. And I'm coming from a city which detests contemporary, which has nothing to do with contemporary. Vienna never can reach contemporary, from my understanding, because they are so terribly deep involved with their own tradition, with their own history. And but I think contemporary is, of course, nobody would say, I'm not interested, everybody says they're interested, but contemporary means to really have the confrontation, to have the confrontation with ourselves. We are the contemporary, and we can't try just to put artists and the artwork of today like domesticated in a museum. And if you look at the work, and this is also the problem, you can't, there is no way to see the work of Paul McCarthy. There is no way. We were today with a group of 10 students and 10 people, but he, of course, he can't do this 5 times a day, then he can't work anymore. So there are problems which are unsolved. And then you can say the MOCA, Museum of Contemporary Art, I don't think it works. I don't want to have a new confrontation with anybody, but I don't think it works like that. Of course, they can make a show on Paul McCarthy, and they will do it for sure. He had a big show in London. But what I want to say, or trying to say, that really what is the specific, the heart of the work he's doing. This is so complicated to transform it to another site. And therefore, I believe you have to do, if you go in a site, you have to do something in the context, in connection with the site. It's a dialogue, what I say, between artists, architects, and designers, and the art public. And I say the art public because I don't believe in the public. Because if we really are interested in art, in contemporary art, you have to do something. Yeah? It can't be delivered just to your home and to your bedroom. You have to stand up and have to be interested, because otherwise you never get it. And all these huge education programs, they are very nice, but it doesn't bring you really to the art, because it is for me evident that especially contemporary art is not just telling stories. It's something you have to reach the context, because everything is about the context, and this is not, you just can't, it's not possible just to read or just to look. You have to be involved. And this is also, I think that's the interesting thing on the production of today's art, that it's a little bit more complicated as art used to be. I don't, oh, there's a light. Is this a light or a micro? A micro light. Because you have an idea how this, is this developed in, is it art? So we better don't touch it. Oh, is it? Ah, very good. Thank you. I think it's a new art territory. It is a philosophical approach. It entails the liberation of art from boundaries and categorical straitjacks, in turn steering the attention towards the simultaneity of artistic expression. As I mentioned, art, architecture, and design as a unified whole. To create a new site of art, as I call it, contemporary art territory, I think this is the real challenge. The real challenge for our society. A society which loves to surround itself with art, but leaves art alone. Leaves art alone with the mechanism of the art market. The new can only arise through a declaration of intention, a vision by a visionary client. A programmatic program is presumption. There is no architecture, from my understanding. There is no architecture without program. No architecture can arise from this. But that just appears today as a flagrant misunderstanding. We confuse challenging and often very skillfully with fulfillment. Or in Wienerisch, said in Vienna mannered, between dream and reality. I just would like to change the subject for a moment. I was the last time here in this room at SCI-Arc. It was Wednesday, March 3rd, 2010. The occasion was a lecture by Raimund Abraham, The Profanation of Solitude. It was his last lecture. Only a few hours later, Raimund Abraham died. Raimund stood for radicalism and utopia. He was fighting for the realization of visions and demand architecture in his most unconventional and pioneering dimension. In memory of my friend, Raimund, who was an exceptional architect and teacher, and in memory of the place here of his last lecture, I would like to request we take a moment of silence for my friend Raimund. Thank you. We had, during the year, an international conference in the absence, called in the absence of Raimund Abraham, and in Vienna. And this book, which you see the cover here, it came out several months ago. To go back, what I mentioned before, and I think this is quite a good example. If we speak about what is the profile, what an artist requests for an art institution. A good example is the artist Anselm Keifer, a German artist. I just mentioned a German artist because he was born in the war, and I think there are many items in his artwork which has to do with where he's coming from and with the history of the country. This is just to give a little idea. This is the studio complex in Barjac, next to Nimes, in the south of France. It is. I would not. There's not enough time. We can't speak about the artist itself, just in the context. I think it's what he's doing is between the material and the spiritual, and it is interesting. Of course, he did his own studio complex, and he makes, of course, museum shows as well. But the spirit, the bones of his work, I think it is. You can't catch it. You can't catch it in some presentation. And also curators. Curators is always a problem, no, because the mostly, I mean, they're always exception, but they have different ideas as the artists have. And curators are good for dead artists because the dialogue is on another level. But if artists alive, it sometimes is a big problem. Of course, there were, it's a part where there were also industrial buildings already, and he turned it in a space of art, in an artist space. Interesting is, because when we speak, what can you do in an art institution, is there is a presentation of one of these artworks, what you can also see in Barjac, is in Milano, in Bicocca. So there are all over the world, there are spaces which are really able to service an artist. This is one of that. The sculpture, a tower, and he called it, this photo is from the complex in Barjac. He called it, "Over your cities, grass will grow." So this is this is the difference between an architect and an artist, because maybe Eric is one of the few. If an architect starts to make joke on his own work, well, this is not a joke, but of course it's serious, but if you put it in this direction, then he gets problem. So the sculpture, a tower, and there's a MOSS building, it's called the Art Tower. And from my understanding, and I like to put these two together, because there are two different points of departure. The one is the artist, who makes a sculpture, and it's the shape of a tower, and then the architect, who makes the art tower. And from my understanding, the art tower is an initiative of the client of Semitower, Frederick Semitower Smith, Semitower Construction, here in Cairo City. And is for my understanding, without any function, which we had a discussion in the last days, this is a powerful, very powerful statement. This is, for my understanding, this is where architecture meets art. Whatever, I mean, there's a big program and there are many ideas, but I think something is done to put, which nobody is doing today, to put an object in the world and then not really know what to do. Because this, we can do a lot of things, but we are not allowed to do anything when we're not clear what we are doing. So we are in this kind of a cage of concept, and therefore I think this is from my end, when we are here in Los Angeles, may I mention this is a very powerful sign, and it's something, it's the entrance, it's the gate to the city. Something different also where you have is James Turrell. This is where he, in the late 70s, he bought near Flagstaff, in some of you for sure know this site, and of course know the work of James Turrell, where he bought the land and the Roden crater and built in a volcanic crater a cathedral of light. It's an apparatus for the perception of light. The tunnels follows the planetary configuration and the altering positions of the sun and the moon. So this is like, I know, I may say, him quite close, James Turrell, and I was from the very beginning. I visited him in Flagstaff before he even started. And this is the main work. And it's also interesting, I could not imagine that in Europe or in some other part of the world something could happen like here, that it's really possible to make it happen, to make it possible. And just on like a footnote, the whole case is finished. I think since it's done, since 3 years. He is not totally happy, so I say something off records, because everything is recorded here. That I have the feeling that the idea is that there can be, I think, 6 or 8 people in 24 hours can go in. So this is the opposite idea of a museum, because a museum needs at least 5,000 or 10,000 people a day. Otherwise, they are not anymore in the competition with the other museums. So that means that an artist doing the work, he believes on it and what he's doing. And this you can't, it's not possible, of course, to transform it in any art institution. He becomes by himself this institution, but he has now, I think since years, he says there are certain things which are not functioning in the way he was thinking. So it's still not open for the public. I think he's not interested. He's not so interested. This is very democratic, from my understanding, because democratic is not that you put all the people in the church, like people with Islam religion go in the St. Stephen Cathedral in Vienna and they come out as Catholic. This is not true. They don't come out as Catholic. They go in as Islamic and go out as Islamic. So nobody asks what they're doing in the church. The only thing which is clear what they're doing in the church is those people who want the spirit of the church, they don't go anymore in the church. So this is something we are in which is not clear what is really what we are obliged to do. And I can't make an interpretation of James Turrell, what he really has in mind, and he also didn't tell me, but I have the feeling he does not want to see all these people looking and making comments or however. But that's not the case. The case is not, it is here. It's like if you write the music, you don't need 100,000. It's written, and then somebody in 100 years can do something or not. So I think this we have to understand. If we really only try to be mediocre and just put everything to the public, I'm very much for that. And I'm coming also from a culture in architecture, which is a social housing and everything which doesn't exist here. But still, I think first you have to do something, and then you can have a discussion. And now everything is upside down. First we have a discussion, and nothing happens. After nothing happens. So this was just I think this the real manifestation of art occurs in permanent, and what I said, in irremovable sites of art created by artists. Another exceptional artist, okay, this is still, there's some image, and and probably I just want to put this in this context. So the whole thing is a big laboratory of lighting. And there is a project which is not done, but which I did. This is the Flag Tower in Vienna, where James Turrell was very much involved. Another very exceptional artist is Donald Judd, and I made a huge exhibition, and there is also. I think his biggest sculpture is in Vienna, in the public space, the stage set he did for this exhibition. But what I mean, of course, it's another generation. Judd died for about 10 years. But what, and I can't make a lecture now on Donald Judd. This is just I want to put this context on space. And he was somebody who, as very few other artists, had a very, very close and intimate relation to space. And so he transformed, as you know, this military base with an installation of more than 100 aluminum sculptures in Marfa, in the end of the world, Texas. So he told me personally always that, because he did also in the MAC in Vienna a permanent installation, that he does not really want, I think he didn't want to cooperate with many people, and especially not with museums, because he said they are barbars and they're not interested in art. They're just interested in presentation and in many things, because I did this, was creating or head of a museum 25 years. So I did know what he's talking about. And when we made this booklet about him, so the curators in the museum said, because he attacked the museum, said this is the worst. I said, of course, I mean, we have to take this quote, because it's very healthy and of course very important. And important in the sense that we really have to think over what we are doing. And I see this institution, art institution, they live always in relation to others. No? The director wants to be, some directors even have white socks, I have seen in New York. So they want to beat the other director, they want to have more people, more audience. So it's, but they don't, I don't want to say they don't care about artists, but the artist is not such an issue. It's also an institution, after it has a certain size, it becomes like a machine for itself. And therefore, I think an art institution can't operate like a factory or like a bank. This is impossible, and there's no way which is like here in Los Angeles, you have all this fundraising, and it makes crazy, it makes you kaput. It doesn't make any sense, because these people, I don't know, people have to do something for art, but you don't have to need parties and all this rubbish around. You have art for art, this is enough. This is enough. What the artist is doing is enough. You don't need always framework. And this is what, this is not only in Los Angeles, here is very special, because there is no really museum here, so there is going a lot on. This is a very quiet place, and we don't have to go in, but this, in this discussion, but I think it's, this is very important that we have places in the world that you really can get a slight idea what was the idea of an artist. You don't find this in any collection in the world. This is not, because this is storage. This is completely the opposite. And we don't have to be so much respect from all the collectors. No respect from the collectors, respect from the artists. I mean, this is, I really feel it, and it has to, and this is too much around everything. And like if you go, you can appreciate, and you can have a very special relation or a different relation, but there is something which is unique in any sense, is like a site like this. And this is, I think this is the importance. If we don't have, a museum is not, it doesn't, in 100 years, nobody will remember what they have done. Things like that is like an archive for our understanding, for our culture. And I believe very strong this is the most important things we can have, and there are quite a number of very exceptional sites of art, if I may call it like that. So, yeah, I mean, could tell a lot, but don't do. This is, I am coming back to, this was, I made an exhibition on the flag tower in Moscow, in the Khrushchev State Museum, and they offered me a variation of spaces and rooms, and they had one space, one building, which was called the Ruin. And this was the only one which interested me, because it didn't have a floor, and it didn't have a ceiling. And of course, you only can do this in Russia, because you never would get a permit in Vienna or somewhere else. But I think it was also for this idea in connection with this with the project. The flag tower was not the building; it was the project. Was adequate because it made sense. It's also from the aesthetics and from many other. I will come back to this. This I show you very quick. This is a very personal work I'm doing since more than 30 years in a very special landscape, because it's very untypical in Austria. It's very close to Hungarian border, so it's not the Alps, it's not the Jodel, it's not the Tyrolean. There are some Tyroleans here, but it is not. I have to disappoint you. It's a very personal dialogue between a very specific landscape. It's been, I would say, it's between art and architecture. It's an excavation. A conquest of land through structural measure, reorientation, or if you want, a defloration and upside downs. So this is the first building I did was a toilet. This is the seats for the waiting person. Of course, a two-seater. I'm not a specialist in toilets, but I mean, you have certain things which you demand in your life. You should also realize with a building on a toilet. And there are vineyards. It's a very special landscape, and there's a quarry. And this quarry was also, for generations, for hundreds of years, you put the stones into the city for buildings. Also, the cathedral is a sandstone. The main cathedral, St. Stephan in Vienna, was partly also from this quarry. And so I believe very strong, you not only can take in your life, there sometimes in some generation comes the moment where you have to give. And this I tried to do, 36 cubes in concrete. Each one had 1.5 ton. And I put it next to the quarry. Was not immediately understandable, but I think it was also to have this very special nature, to give the nature a kind of a new dialogue. This was one of the intention. Yeah. And then was the cube 37. It was the 37th cube, so this was a kind of a living space. Back to what I wanted, what we showed in Moscow and in other cities, also in Los Angeles and in New York. This is coming. I mean, the point of departure was the flag tower in Vienna, and my intention was a program because this flag tower is designed from the architect Friedrich Thams 2 years before the end of the war, 43, 44, and is the largest bunker building, and it's also. This is one of the case which for me, very important. It's a monument of the dark history, of the very dark history of the country. And the very strange thing is that you always, you put things down and then you put up monuments. But this is already a monument. You don't have to design a new one. And this is even stronger than any other. And for my understanding, the only switch or the only communication is the media of the art. And the idea was to make it just in one sentence. The idea was to build up a collection, a permanent collection for the next 5,000 years or something. It's a very massive building. And not to buy the artwork anywhere on the art market or somewhere else, to invite the artist And for a frame in a long time, like 15, 20 years, one artist by the other, so that there is something in the end. You have a configuration which is linked to the site, to the history of the site, and this is the history of the country, and between the artists. It's not an exhibition. It's something where the next artist can react on the artist before. This idea didn't happen. I mean, I have still the big problem in Vienna, no, the big explosion, because I don't know for which reason, but we can figure that out. We are now on the way to make analyses on the, like in the Sigmund Freud manner, but this is not the case, what I want to talk about here. And then we showed it like in, and there are two interventions. One intervention from the outside. It should be the same in the outside like it always was, this kind of brutal kind of ugliness, if you want. I don't find it so ugly, but people hate it. And this we have to keep, this feeling. Also hate is a feeling, because they don't hate it for the history. They hate it because they say this is a Schandfleck, the ugly piece in the very aesthetic or a very mise-en-scène environment of Vienna. So this was like this ruin, and there are two inventions. One, a tower, a media tower of Jenny Holzer, and this sky space from James Turrell. I don't want to go to, this is how, now it's like a storage. And I just want to, what I think what is very important for today's art production, you don't have to go in a bunker only or in an industrial building which already exists. I mean, can be very, very luxury, but I think it's important that you don't, for artists, they are not that stupid what architects always have in mind. Artists are able to create their own space. And I would say to make a new museum, which is really new, not from the idea of the 19th century, to have this huge hall, and then you have these little boxes, and the salons, and so, to make really something, I think it is important to have a fragmentary space, whatever that means. I think there are some architects also here working on that. The worst thing is to have this kind, for today, art production, to have a finalized space, which then nobody can move anymore, especially the artist not. So this is only to show how these things works. This was not the idea of the collection. This is just temporary, the collection now. And as you see, there's also, I have to put it in, and it's a piece of your director here, of Eric Moss. If we talk about interesting, or from my understanding, interesting spaces for art or art spaces, one is for sure is the MASS MOCA in North Adams in Massachusetts. And they have many artists and many different. But what the interesting thing is there's a Lewitt, a wall drawing retrospective. I think it's in two huge buildings. It's the hugest, as far as I know, Lewitt ever had. But the interesting thing is that I just read this in the internet, they announced this installation is on view through 2033. So I think this is exactly the dimension. Even if we speak about art spaces, it's also a question of time. Do we just produce? I mean, you can do all the things. I mean, I believe that you can make things very fast and very quick. But on the other hand, art is very important to have a long time run, not like a product which is after a time you don't want to see it anymore because it has this stigma of the fashion. The other, this was happened this year I mean, this can happen in every city, in Moscow. They invited me, they made a 70-floor building, and there's a whole district of high-rise building. And so also in Moscow, the crisis catch the developers. And so the building has on top a luxury restaurant, and on the basement, 5 or 6 floors, it's a luxury hotel. In between is nothing. And so, and they also can't, they told me in the next years there's no way to do anything in between. So they asked me if we can, it's quite huge, to make a professional art space. It didn't work because you also, you need then the funds or whatever. But I think, I don't want to sell this now as the perfect space of art, but I was really touched to see that, and I could absolutely imagine that here you can do something with artists. You don't need this idiotic ceiling you have in the LACMA, in this one building, where it's more ceiling than volume in the space. This has nothing to do with architecture. Architecture is a ceiling, and if you have all these cardboards and so, then a sculpture can't breathe. There is no way. If you only make games and then put air in and light, nobody needs light. This is also, it's only curators say that. Nobody needs light. You can go with the flashlight. I think there's too much technique, and it sucks the spirit of the space. And so here it's clear. It's just this is the whole situation. I didn't know that before. There's a whole new city also in Moscow. So this is to bring the steamroller to fly. That was a show I did with Chris Burden. And I mean, of course, it was the museum as an art site, I would say. This is the message of that. And we were working, I think, 4 or 5 years, because it was a dream idea to make a steamroller flying, and we did this together with him. But what I want to say, this, I think, now the steamroller exists, I think, in Basel at the, how's it called? But this is not, that doesn't interest me. This is now a collector and then a company. But the interesting thing was, also in a special time with a special artist to make a special thing happen. This is the only thing what did, the other thing is it's a site-specific work. And there is no other work as a site-specific work, for my understanding. Because no other work is an import-export company. You bring, you take off. You can do this with everything. You should not do this too much with artwork. And I think there are some people in the world who they understand, but the museums have another appeal or another idea mostly. This is a case which this is Vito Acconci. Vito Acconci, I think, a very, very unique and very special artist. And the thing is, what I just, as an example for what I mean, is that when we made the restoration of this building, of the exhibition space, I invited Vito, and so he had several projects, and it was also not from one day to the other. But then he had a project, I really jumped immediately on it, and what he did is to repeat the space which was renovated, to repeat it 1-to-1. So if you repeat it 1-to-1, you don't bring the new space in the old space, because it's the same size. And this is what he did, and the space we built was much more solid built. It was no mise en scène, not the stupid walls where you have these cardboard walls, or where you put paintings on. So the whole thing was really, it was renovated. So people, it's hard for the society to understand. No, you renovate a building, then they want to see the renovated space, but you don't show that. You show the artist, and that's what we did. And I think it's in the end, okay, you don't make so many friends doing this, but I think so I just show you a little. This was the idea from Vito Acconci. This is the space, and to put this together, so you have to shift it. You make it upside down, and a new configuration of space was, of course, a new space was the result. And he wanted a space that the people can go on the roof.
2 Monate Arbeitszeit.
And usually you could not go on the roof of the museum because even the glass was not in this condition.
Die bestehende Glasdecke ist das Zentrum der Installation.
So I don't want to.
Sie wird im versinkenden und aufsteigenden Zustand nachgebaut.
This was really a massive, more massive construction in steel and glass as they existed.
Ragen auf einem Streifen von 2 Metern über den Zentralraum hinaus in die angrenzende U-förmige Ausstellungshalle. Alles soll für das Publikum begehbar sein.
So as we walk up the sinking room,
wenn wir auf dem Dach des sinkenden Raumes weiter hinaufgehen, werden wir auch hier wieder gedrückt und gesandwiched. Zwischen dem Gipfel des sinkenden Raumes und dem bestehenden Raum.
He speaks about the sinking space and the existing, and then you are becoming sandwiched in between these two. Okay, this is just recently, it was 3 years ago. It's another artist. We did a project on site, Anish Kapoor. They're all or they're coming additional?
The more will come. No,
but then you could put it in front, no? Yeah. Looks like. So what the artists create is a machine who is making the sculpture. And it's always a dream. And he donated it afterwards to the MAC. And with an agreement that whenever, this is now in this flag tower, whenever it's open, every hour it has to be a shooting when it's open for the public. So because then the sculpture can grow. Okay, I don't. I always tried to be as extreme as possible on the borderline, and I think this is what a museum has to do, because to do things which nobody else is doing, even in producing the artwork, and also I understood the museum side as an experiment. So I think that cost me a lot of whatever, but they hate it. I made the first exhibition on the Democratic People Republic of Korea. It was the first time that they really gave it. We had a negotiation for more than 4 years. It was absolutely not easy. And we all had to do everything together. Like if you work with the Guggenheim, they also check, of course, when you make a catalog with the Guggenheim, then you have to check the text and the graphic and whatever. So they do this in the same manner, but of course under different circumstances. But I just, if we speak, I mean, I'm very, I think that without an experiment, you can't do anything with contemporary art. And this is maybe not this radical new art, but I think to bring, and what I did not want is to make a retro. I really never tried to make any retrospective, because this somebody else can do, but it doesn't interest me at all. And this was, of course, so we called it Flowers for Kim Il-sung. It is that what exists, what happens now. This you have to show, and not a dead body. So this was the most complicated thing, to get this, the paintings out of the leaders, because they were really scared. Okay, I don't want to, it's just as an idea. So the other, this I just, Raimund Abraham, I think an artist which I appreciate very strong here from Los Angeles, and I know very long. And I just want to bring this together maybe with, we did a show with Raimund Abraham, Jason Rhodes. He died, which was much too early, of course, and I know them all very close, and Hans Weigand. So what I just want to say, like a totally other scale, another dimension, like the Schindler House. So we did this exhibition. I mean, Schindler, like a really utopian architect. So we did, this show we did was in the memory, maybe, in the memory of Schindler. So they took over the space for, I think, for 3 months, and had also a printer who printed poster, these 3 artists. So just something which is in a lifeboat also, because they had a boat, and in which nobody could manage this boat, of course. And this was a kind of link. And what I still understand, what you're able to do, even with a little space. And if you speak about Schindler, then it doesn't make any sense, for my understanding, to put photos on the wall on Schindler and make a house museum. So it was, from the beginning, was the idea to make a vibrant something which is really like a laboratory for the scale, like in the spirit of Schindler, of course, but you can't repeat or anything else. One thing what I think is quite an interesting place, so interesting space, is the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, because it's kind of, I spoke years ago with the director. He hates it and won't have a new building, which is, I think, nonsense, because now from the excavation, like a sphinx comes in, then the restoration and all things. So you have it a little bit. You're closer to the art, not just to put it there and then in a cage and in something behind you can't touch and so. I think this is an interesting. They probably don't know how interesting it is, and they also want to have a museum like any other museum in the world. Dennis Hopper, I want, because he's coming from here, and I also spent many years for this exhibition with him. So I was traveling a lot to New Mexico, to other places. it was not easy. It was a big discussion, and it was his first, after a long time, his first comprehensive, huge exhibition on fine art. And so we also want to show the movies, but not really. So we put his movies, where he became so famous, in a box, and so there was running a program. But the idea was to concentrate on his visual work. One thing I wanted to show you, and I try to cut to be more fast, this was a very long time ago. We did the first outside Soviet, it was still Soviet Union, the first exhibition on constructivist. And this was the first time that I saw the original of a Malevich, the red square in the white field. And I believe that you can't, I mean, this is an icon. It's an icon which really, I was so thirsty after to have something, and I was really proud. And so we made a concrete wall. It was like, I think, 3.5 tons. It was easy to build it. It was more complicated to destroy it after the exhibition. But I believe, I mean, you don't have to build a concrete wall whenever you make a painting exhibition. But I think what I want to a little bit to put the focus, if you don't have any respect and just to show, I mean, sometimes it's so terrible what is shown. Nobody is interested anymore in which condition, in which environment, what is the aesthetic. People don't understand. The art community, they are barbars. They don't understand anything. So, I mean, because they can't understand, because they don't see anything else. So this is, I mean, to have, you can't say on one hand, this is the hero, it was the beginning of modern movement in the world, and then you put it on cardboard. And I saw an exhibition with this Malevich like 5 years ago in the garage from Melnikov in Moscow, and they had it on cardboard and had a video, and the video was a projection because it's a small piece, so they put this on doesn't make any sense. So this is, I think, this is too much mise en scène around the art. Art, if you have to try to understand what the artist, what is the intention of the artist. Of course, it's always completely different. It's not that you can say you have to do it in this and this way, but I think like everybody, like a dentist or everybody who really wants to make a good work, he has to go closer. But all the art institution is something, it's to make in a kind of happy, a certain kind of public. This is now, I will finish with this. I understand the confrontation. What I wanted to do with this lecture, not just to tell you certain things or give a lecture. I would have this intention to confront you before you come in with a piece of art. Because it's always, everybody say, okay, I liked it, and so on. And this is a piece of art. I was 2 times in the last 3-4 months in Beijing and talked to this artist, and they would be ready to give this here. I mean, a gift, not financially, but the donation in the spirit way for Eric Moss. But of course, these architects, they have to defend themselves. They have to defend architects. So therefore, you can't put, this is not possible, there's no way, you can't put a piece of art in front of an architecture institution, even if it's the greatest institution of architecture in the world. And at least this, it's called this piece, this was just the conferences, we had it in Beijing. This piece is called, this is, where we are. And the sculpture is called Miss Mao trying to poise herself at the top of Lenin's head. And it's quite a measurement. like 260 to 250, 165 inches. This should be, and I have to regret, and I'm very sorry that it didn't happen, so excuse me, that we couldn't manage to have this sculpture in front of the museum. Maybe for the very last thing, just a little video on the axis Los Angeles, Vienna, and this was the last show I curated here at the MAC Center in LA. Can you make it louder a little bit? This is not a curated show.
But it becomes much more like a guerrilla operation, the multiple small cells.
Right now is chaos, and chaos is the basic of art, no? First of all, the garage has a little tradition with this city, but it's also the smallest item of a space. They're very strong artists. I think they're really remarkable artists, all of them, and they have a big respect to each one, and this is the only way that it can work.
I think it's an open field. It's art, or it's architecture, it's design, yeah. And we are all in the same boat, yeah, and to have a discussion in an interesting atmosphere. LA is an interesting meet point. I think we need this all, yeah.
This is part of what I think is Peter Noever's invention to keep deconstructing and reshaping what the museum is. So the MAC is not any longer an institution that is related to one building like the one in Vienna, which is a traditional museum, but it becomes much more like a guerrilla operation, the multiple small cells.
Piece of paper over here. Naked.
So let me just finish with one statement. The greatest risk for art is not to take any risk. Thank you.